Again, Alexander stood before the throne of the Sky King, but the reception was not even as joyous as a modest young man like Alexander of Daventry could have expected. "So you're back," Lord Azure said heavily, "and now I am honor-bound to release you. Good grace is another trait scarce in the winged ones." "And grant him a boon," the Lady Ariel put in sharply. Lines of worry and concern etched Azure's wife's striking patrician features, and she regarded Alexander with a little more affection than her husband then. "Even so," said Lord Azure, "take it and go. And if you ever come again to the Sacred Isle before the day the Golden Fleece rests once more in our treasury, Alexander of Daventry, I shall throw you from our cliffs myself." Before Alexander could ask what this boon might be, he had a few suggestions of his own if anyone was interested. The winged courtiers seized him once more. Again, he was carried above the towers and pillars of the city of the winged ones, but instead of returning him to the beach or even the cliffs, this time he was transported to the highest spot in the entire isle, a cloud-topped cave that held the Eyrie of the Oracle. Alexander had read of the Winged One's oracle, a mystic seeress who can infallibly predict the future, and who has been consulted even by King Caliphim and Queen Ilaria. His boon, it seemed, was to be an audience with her. Alexander was ushered into the cave by these suddenly respectful courtiers. Surprisingly young for one such, the oracle was bending over a well of green radiance. Unlike the other inhabitants of this isle, the look she turned upon Alexander was a kindly one. "Welcome, Prince Alexander of Daventry," the oracle said. "Do not ask how your name or your quest is known to me. Many things are known to me, though few indeed are those I may effect. Young Lord Azure hopes I will tell you your future, and thus persuade you to leave. But I know your future, Prince Alexander, and I know that you will not leave the land of the Green Isles, perhaps forever. I can tell you no more. Of more use to you than any threats or promises I make would be a vial of this sacred water. Take it, and farewell upon your quest." Alexander heard a gasp from behind him as the oracle filled a small carved crystal vial with the glowing water of the sacred well. He had barely grasped it when his escort hustled him out of the oracle's array and launched him into empty space once more. Nor had he full grasp of the oracle's meaning. Was he doomed to perish without ever seeing Cassima again? Was his quest already doomed? Would Cassima or his parents ever know of his fate? Or was there another meaning in the words? One of success and... Success and what? This time, the Winged Ones did deposit him on the beach. One of the two took off almost before he had landed, but the other, whom Alexander recognized as the guard who had wished him well at the doors of the catacombs, hesitated a moment. "Farewell. We wish you well," he said, as if he might say more. But before Alexander could say anything in reply, he too was gone, and Alexander was once more alone on the beach of the Isle of the Sacred Mountain. Baffled still by the oracle's words, Alexander unfurled his magic map to depart. He blinked in amazement. There were no longer 4 islands upon its surface. There were now 5. Alexander remembered Ali telling him that the lands in this part of Daventry were subject to change, often abruptly and for little logical or easily discerned reason. Now he had seen the truth of that for himself. But of this island he had read and heard mentioned. He considered a moment and decided to go there, the Isle of the Mists. The abrupt transition from sunlight to clinging mist made Alexander shiver in spite of himself. The Isle of the Mists certainly lived up to its name. The bright sky of the land of the Green Isles was obscured by a mantle of mist. Mist eddied in a thin veil upon the clammy sand. Mist seemed to hang from the very tree limbs like funeral shrouds. It was not much a happy place. As Alexander stood looking about himself, he became aware of the distant throbbing of drums to the north and west. Perhaps the race of earth sorcerers that inhabited the island were hard at work upon some great magic. Alexander followed the beach road west. Before he had walked much, Alexander came to a small village, obviously the home of the island's sorcerer kings. He had hoped to find someone there, but in fact the entire village was deserted. The drums to the north were much louder, more intense and insistent, and something in their ominous rumble warned Alexander that it was not a good time to disturb the priest kings at their magic. He decided to leave and return later. As he turned to go, Alexander's attention was caught by the rusty scythe stuck into one of the oak trees. Its condition spoke of long neglect and exposure to the elements, and Alexander did not think it would be missed. He slung it over his shoulder, and his glance lit upon something else that would not be missed. In the fire pit, there was a jagged, shiny black rock, an unburned lump of coal. Alexander scooped it out and added it to his possessions. If he returned to the Isle of Wonder, there was at least one ongoing quarrel to which he could put a permanent end. Retreating quickly now, Alexander returned to the beach and wished himself to the Isle of the Beast. From the beach he headed inward through the forest. The once boiling pond was now quite cool, and at last he reached the wall that enclosed the garden. The stone archer eyed Alexander with malicious intensity as Alexander moved toward the gate. If he would ever meet the ruler of this land, he would have to pass beyond it. But Alexander this time had not come unprepared. Unslinging the shield he had taken from the Winged One's catacomb, he held it up over his head as he walked between the stone pillars. Just as he had suspected, the archer came to life and fired. Its lone shaft struck the shield and shattered. It would have been sure death to the unwary. Arrowless now, the Guardian froze in place again, its work completed, forever to remain motionless. Alexander entered the garden beyond the wall. Before him was a huge hedge of the most beautiful red and white roses Alexander had seen. They were as sweetly fragrant as the stinking rose had been putrid, and their spread blossoms were as wide as his hand. Alexander plucked a white rose, hoping soon to be able to give it to Cosima in person. Next, he attacked the dense, thorny hedge, for the path continued on beyond it, and there was no other way through. And though it grew nearly as fast as he chopped, it fell to a few sharp whacks with the scythe. Alexander stepped through the sundered roses into a formal garden of the sort that would not be out of place gracing a castle. In fact, a castle such as Alexander could see in the dim distance. At the garden's center, a fountain carved of white porcelain sprayed jets of water into the sky. "You, boy, what are you doing here?" The low snarling was almost impossible to interpret as words. And when Alexander turned to face the speaker, he saw a jarring sight. The one who had spoken was monstrous in form, with the snarling, snouted face of some wild boar, yet it was clothed in the dazzling raiment of a prince. The beast glowered fierce red, intelligent eyes at the startled Prince Alexander. "I am Alexander of Daventry," Alexander began, but the beast prince silenced him with a gesture. "I care not who you are, mortal man," the beast snarled. "You have forced your way into my garden, and now you are doomed." My prince fell silent. Was this the fate the oracle had predicted? In short, sharp, gurring sentences, the beast acquainted Alexander with his fate. The walls were not to keep the beast inside, but to keep trespassers out. And it was not the beast intruders had to fear, but his curse. Any who joined the beast within his garden would become as hideous as he, and be forced to serve him through all of eternity, unless the victim were to bring the beast a bride, unafraid to live with his beastliness. "Only then will the curse be broken for all of us. Look at your last sun as mortal man. When it sets, you shall be as I." Reflexively, Alexander looked toward the sky. It was late afternoon. He had but an hour or two at most before his threatened transformation. "I will find someone, I swear it!" Alexander cried. The beast handed him a ring. "Take this, and give it to her if you meet her, Alexander. If she accepts, this ring will transport you both to me in a heart breath." Alexander turned and began to run. Behind him, the beast's howls of endless anguish filled the air. They seemed to follow him all the way to the Isle of the Crown. Alexander rushed to the village of the Crown without even pausing to see if Sing Sing had returned to the oak tree. Other than Cassima, there was but just one maiden he knew in the entire land of the Green Isles, other than the winged one Celeste, and he wouldn't wish her upon either man or beast. And he wasn't at all certain Beauty would prefer life with a beast prince even to her present plight. Still, no son of King Graham and Queen Valenice of Daventry would surrender to misfortune without a fight. When Alexander reached the village, he hesitated. A few minutes wouldn't matter either way, and he owed it to Hakim to warn him about his frequent browser. But when Alexander entered the pawn shop, the old man in the black robe was already there. It was a situation which would have to change. Alexander fumbled in his pocket for the peppermint leaves he had collected from the Isle of the Sacred Mountain. Brandishing them like a torch, Alexander waved them under the old man's nose. The result was as he'd expected. Whooping and giggling, the old man in the black robe, a genie now unmasked, danced out of the shop, intoxicated on the fumes. "Hakim," Alexander said to the pawnbroker, "I must warn you. I have to warn you." "No, Prince Alexander, I must warn you. If you are caught by Alhazred's men, your life won't be worth a shaven obul. Stay away from here for your own safety. Get out! Go quickly!" The pawnbroker was obviously in deadly earnest, and Alexander exited this shop as quickly as he had come. Understandably, reluctant to get any of his new friends in trouble, Alexander knew that he must tell Jolo some of what he had learned, or leave a message with him for him with Ali. But Alexander's luck was with him. Jolo was again in the bookshop, just as if he had been waiting for him. When I met Master Jolo in person, I learned that this had indeed been the case. Before beginning her period of enforced mourning, Cassima had spoken to Jolo of her captivity in Mordak's hands, and of the young prince who had briefly shared it. When Alexander appeared on the Isle of the Crown, Jolo hoped that Alexander could free Cassima. even knowing the prince would be spied on at all times, as were all on the island. For that matter, being without proof that Cosima actually was in danger, Jolo could do little beyond provide Alexander with as much information as lay within his gift. To do this, Master Jolo spent many anxious hours at Ali's bookshop, awaiting each of Alexander's appearances. "Jolo!" Alexander exclaimed. "Friend!" "Keep your voice down," the clown said worriedly. "The wedding is still tomorrow, and Alhazred thinks you would make the perfect centerpiece for the wedding feast." "Never mind that now," said Alexander. "Listen, it is a genie that Alhazred uses to spy on everyone. Do you know where its container might be? It will be some sort of bottle or lamp. Have you seen it? Could you get it?" Jolo was not as surprised as Alexander might have expected to hear that Abdul Alhazred had a genie. As I have said, Jolo always had suspicions of his own. "I could make a good guess where he keeps it," the clown said slowly, "but if I disturbed it, I would be instantly discovered. Unless I could put a duplicate in its place." "But do you know what it looks like?" Alexander demanded. "All I know of the genie's lamp, Prince Alexander, is that it is blue, if indeed I have seen it, as I believe I have. Alas, that I can be no more aid to you." "Blue, is it? I'll see what I can do," Alexander said wryly. The clown got to his feet and clasped my prince's arms. "Farewell, Prince Alexander. I have a feeling we will not meet again." "Oh yes, we will," Alexander said. "I'll see you at Alhazred's wedding." Rash, brave words spoken. Alexander left the bookshop. Time was becoming dear now. The sun was rapidly sinking, but Alexander knew he had but one chance to avoid the curse of the beast. If he failed, more time would matter not. Still, fortune favored him once more that afternoon. As he strode out of the village, the girl Beauty was in her garden. Still veiled, she appeared to be gently sobbing. When Alexander saw the girl named Beauty again, all his prepared speeches dropped right from his mind. Instead, he went to the garden wall and held out the white rose he had taken from the Isle of the Beast. The rose was to have been Cosima's. Though slightly crushed from being carried in his pocket, its fragrance filled the twilight. "This is for you," Alexander called. Beauty came over to the fence. "What a beautiful rose," she said, taking it from his hands. "Where did it come from?" "From the Isle of the Beast," Alexander said quickly. "A creature is there. He is hideous to behold, but his heart is gentle and kind. He seeks a bride to end his loneliness." "I know how terrible it is to be alone without someone to love," Beauty said. "I feel so sorry for him." She looked at Alexander curiously, as if wondering what he had to do with all of this. "Will you come to him? He seeks a bride. You would receive nothing but kindness at his hand, but would be free of this life. This is his token." Alexander held the ring out to Beauty. Gold, garnet, and obsidian shone in his palm. Beauty stared at the ring for a moment. Then at the man's where she lived ill-treated and despised. Again, the ring. Beauty's small fingers plucked it from Alexander's palm. "I will go to him, willingly." And as was promised, they were instantly transported to the beast garden. The beast began to roar, choked off in an instant, when he saw Alexander had brought a woman with him. "Does she come here willingly?" the beast shouted at Alexander. "Why do you not ask her?" "I do," Beauty spoke for herself. Raising the veil over her face, she looked directly at the beast. Her name fitted her well. "Alexander told me that you were kind and let me love you, and if that is true, I do not care what you look like." Then, said the beast, barely daring to believe, "we two shall be happy here together." he held out a hand to Beauty. She placed her hand in his, and at that moment both their forms shimmered and changed. When sparkles cleared from the sky, Beauty was clothed in garb as dazzling as the beast's, and the beast was transformed into a strong, slender man of middle years. The evil enchantment is broken for both of us, Alexander, said the former beast. Know now that I was once known as Prince Cocteau, the thrice blessed, and shall be again. Know also that I am grateful to you beyond words, and I'm sure my bride is too. He offered a flat object to Alexander. Thanks to you, I am again blessed. Take this mirror as your reward for your kindness. It has the power to reveal the true nature of any who gaze into it. Would that I could give you no more. But since the Druids stole my jeweled coat of arms, I have naught but this. It is yours. Now go your way. All I ask is privacy for my bride and myself. With that, the couple turned away and passed, hand in hand, through the gilded gate that led to the former Beast Prince's castle. Alexander stood alone in the garden, holding the mirror the beast had given him, his human form, his to keep forever. He wondered if he would ever feel the relief it was his right to feel after an escape from such a horrible fate. But it seemed the only emotion he could feel right now was fear. Fear for Casima's future. As the sound of the fountain echoed through the garden, Alexander examined the Beast Prince's gift. The word truth was carved around its frame border over and over, in dozens of languages and alphabets. Alexander gazed into it, but saw nothing other than his own sunburned, weary face. Absently, he collected Beauty's discarded slave clothes and stowed them in his pack. Then, the memory struck him, and he checked in the spell book. Yes, there it was, in the Make Rain spell ingredients. Falling water, not from the sky. Knowing that he could come back here at need, Alexander replaced the spellbook in his pack and left the garden, leaving the lovers to themselves. At the hedge, he plucked one last white rose for Casima, determined again to offer it to her. When he reached the beach, he wished himself on the Isle of Wonder. By now, Alexander had a good idea of what he needed to cast the spells in his spellbook, and where each ingredient might be found. He also knew that Casima was to marry the next day at noon unless he could stop it, and he couldn't stop it without help. But through Alhazred's meeting, all the islands had grown so suspicious of one another that they certainly wouldn't accept him on his word alone. He had to gain their trust, and the quickest way to do that was to bring them gifts. The two queens of the Isle of Wonder might listen to his words if he brought them another lump of coal. Offering a rain spell to the weather magician druids of the Isle of Mists might gain him an audience there. He had the sacred water, and he knew where he could get the falling water. All he needed was the last of the ingredients for the rain. Salt water, not from the sea. A quick jaunt inland brought him once more to the garden outside Chessboard Land. This time there was a dark green glass bottle on the table. "Drink me," the label said, but the bottle seemed to be empty. Alexander uncorked it. The bottle was indeed empty, but as he sniffed it, he caught whiff of a scent that sent him reeling. Curiouser and curiouser, Alexander thought, wondering what may have happened to whomever may have emptied the container. He slipped the bottle into his pocket, but his mind was elsewhere. Salt water was what he needed for his third spell ingredient. Tears. Tears were salt water not from the sea, but how to get them, and where? It is a mark of Alexander's desperation that acted as he did. Returning to the swamp, he took another bottle of milk, but did not drink from it. The dog would stay quiet, its only bark quietly clothing its form. The bump on a log and stick in the mud both ignored him and each other completely. Back in the pun garden, Alexander gave the bottle of milk to the nearest of the baby's tears. Immediately, all the plant babies without bottles began to wail. The babies' breaths joined in with their own howl. It was just as he hoped. The baby's tears cried real, true tears. Truly, nothing is as it appears. Alexander stepped to the back row of the baby's tears and placed the brass lamp and sometimes teapot beneath the bountiful flow of tears from the last plant. Its tears began filling the lamp. Stepping away satisfied, he then added the sacred water from the oracle's pool. The lamp was now near to full. One quick return to the Isle of the Beast, and the rain spell would be ready. Carefully repacking the lamp, Alexander took out the lump of coal and ventured through the polka-dotted gates into chessboard land. He had only a short time to wait before the red and white queens showed up. "Your Majesties," Alexander began, "I now have the answer to your dilemma. Will this do?" With an exaggerated bow and sweeping gesture, he held out the second piece of coal to the white queen. "Why, how perfectly lovely! It will do quite well." She immediately snatched the coal out of Alexander's hands and then snorted. "As we need this no longer, you may have this splendid rotten egg as your reward." The white queen sniffed graciously. "You do deserve something for your time and trouble. See, Rufina," she addressed her sister, "this nice young man has given me this wonderful piece of coal to present to the dear little Princess Cassima when she marries tomorrow." "Yes, Blanche, it is very nice," Queen Rufina said grudgingly. "And now, your Majesties, if you'd—" "Little too nice, if you ask me," Rufina went on. "It's nearly twice the size of mine. As I am the elder, Blanche dear, I'm sure that you'll agree that the nicer of the two pieces is by rights mine." "Ladies," Alexander said. "I shall certainly agree to no such thing," Blanche said stoutly. "You wanted that nasty old piece of coal right enough when all I had was my poor egg. It is perfectly obvious that—" "Well, I shan't give it up, and that's that." Still arguing, the two queens bounded away once more, leaving Alexander with egg on his face. Or at least in his hands. "Oh well," Alexander sighed as he tucked it carefully away. "Perhaps the druids will be more reasonable." Alexander made his way back to the beach, and for the last time transported himself to the Isle of the Beast. There, with no stone archer to avoid, it was easy work to retrace his steps to the beast's garden. Beautiful as it was, Alexander was tired of seeing it, just as he was tired of the Isle of Wonder, the Isle of the Sacred Mountain, and the constant coming and going that the magic map made possible. Just because a thing can be done doesn't mean it's a thing worth doing, Alexander thought quickly. I don't think this much rushing about is good for anyone. He filled the brass lantern to the top with falling water from the fountain, making certain afterward that the lid was tightly secure so that the liquid would not spill out again. Alexander then opened the spell book and turned to the Make Rain spell. He chanted the spell over the lantern and felt the brass grow warm to his touch in response. The spell was cast. Now all that needed to be done was boil the water, and rain would come. This last preparation made, Alexander returned to the beach and teleported again to the Isle of the Mists.